Harvest-Now-Decrypt-Later is the thing everyone thinks of, and then they don't think about anything else. They just kind of stop there. And that's fine, I guess. Like, if something's broken in cryptography, it's broken.
Welcome to Shielded, the last line of cyber defense by PQ Shield, the podcast where we are moving the conversation around post-quantum cryptography from the why to the how. I'm Jo Lintzen, your host, and I'm here to guide you through the challenges, innovations, and solutions that will help your organization stay secure in the quantum era. Let's future-proof your defenses together. Welcome to this episode of Shielded, the last line of cyber defense. I'm Jo Lintzen, your host, and today we're joined by renowned expert in quantum computing and cybersecurity, Konstantinos Karagiannis. Konstantinos is the director of quantum computing services at Protiviti, where he helps organizations understand and navigate the challenges posed by the quantum computing era, particularly in the context of post-quantum cryptography. He's also the host of the Post-Quantum World podcast and has given talks on cutting-edge topics, including the fascinating issue of when quantum computers might be able to crack current cryptographic systems. He's also a regular speaker up on the big stage at RSA conference, so if you get a chance to see one of his presentations, I highly recommend it. It's always very enlightening. With quantum technologies advancing at an accelerated pace, and we were just talking about that before jumping on the recording, of course, it's crucial that businesses and governments understand the urgency and also understand how to get started with adopting post-quantum solutions. Konstantinos, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me. This is great. I don't get to go on too many podcasts as a guest, so this is a little rare treat for me. And what better show to go on than yours? I have to say, excellent work so far.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So you have an interesting background, and throughout your career, you've been wearing many different hats, all hopefully of the right shade of color.
Yes. I wear literal hats too. I do. I was going to mess with you and like be wearing one when this starts, like my Oppenheimer hat or something. I thought that would have been funny, but then the listeners would have been left out if they're not watching the video.
I hear you. Yeah. And with the hairstyle that we both have, it's advised to wear hats as soon as the sun's out, but also sometimes on a cloudy day, it's even worse. So there we go.
Drop that heat.
So maybe besides wearing hats, maybe you can share a little bit about your path that got you to the position that you're now in, and
Sure.
Sort of gives you this unique viewpoint on both the opportunities and the threat that comes with quantum computing.
Yeah. Everything I did sort of was building towards this point, whether I knew it or not. You can't always predict the future. I did actually start studying quantum physics at Polytech in Brooklyn years ago. And then I ended up moving into cybersecurity. Obviously, quantum computers didn't exist at the time, and they were just still something that was building. And I was interested in all aspects of it. I was interested in cryptography. I was interested in hacking. I was interested in hacking the universe, I guess, in multiple ways. And so I spent a lot of time working on financial applications in like a red teaming sort of way. I was in charge of basically only financial customers over the jobs. I did a lot of bank jobs. I used to joke because that's where the money was, literally. And I ended up exposed to blockchain early as a result. And I gave the first talk on hacking that at DEF CON years ago. I've been involved in very advanced cryptographic kind of technologies, but quantum was always there, living in my mind. I was hoping something would manifest, and it did sort of start to happen, and post-quantum cryptography started being a thing. So I ended up being able to be one of the first people sort of shouting from the rooftops about how real this was. And I mean, I was giving talks at major shows like the International Security Forum and things like that way back in 2012 on the quantum threat. So I've been involved in this a long time, in QKD and other technologies. So now it's been great to be able to just focus on this. And at Protiviti, I get to, with my team, I get to work on use cases for customers, doing things with quantum computers, and also the use case that everyone has on planet Earth is the migration of post-quantum cryptography. So I help a lot with that for customers. Yeah.
how to prioritize, where to
Mhm.
get started, and all those fine things. So of course, I think, part of the unique perspective I think you bring to the conversation is, of course, the path of, having this heck the planet attitude, and being, sort of being brought up through the red team route.
Mhm.
Always, your first thought will always be is like, oh, where's the weak spot? How can I break this? And why would I? Like, what's in it for me if I successfully break it, right? I think that's oftentimes the conversation that we also need to have. And I think you are quite opinionated also about, like, one of the main reasons that is always sort of the first, you know, threat that everyone talks about, which is Harvest-Now-Decrypt-Later, and, how that is a thing today, and we need to prepare against it. So maybe you can share a little bit of your viewpoint on Harvest-Now-Decrypt-Later and related things like Harvest-Now-Forge-Later. I think, somewhat falls into
Sure.
a similar.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. It's funny because Harvest-Now-Decrypt-Later is the thing everyone thinks of, and then they don't think about anything else. They just kind of stop there. They're like, and that's fine, I guess. Like, if something's broken in cryptography, it's broken. You know, even if an attack is really, really hard to do, think of like the CVSS calculator. You play around with all the variables and you get a score that makes it like super hard to execute because it has to be an adjacent network and the level of difficulty and all these things, authenticated, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's still broken and you still can't use it anymore. And that's why we have in the past moved away from cryptographic schemes, right? Because they're broken. Um, Going all the way back to the DES era, like, and we just know that, like, when something's broken, it's broken or backdoored or whatever. So Harvest-Now-Decrypt-Later is this idea that something you sent was captured by someone, and one day, given the time and resources, they're going to reverse it. Now, it might be interesting information, it might not be, but that's it in a nutshell. What people forget is that's a lot of harvesting and a lot of decrypting. So in many ways, even though it's broken, you kind of feel safe in a weird way. I mean, I shouldn't be saying this, but you kind of end up feeling like, well, why my email? Like, really? Like, when China gets a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, they're going to go after my email in the next 30 years? Probably not. And probably not. But that's not the limit of the attack. So you got to believe, yes, nation state actors or criminal organizations, they're going to go after things that are particularly juicy. Company A potentially sending something juicy to company B, or country A sending something juicy to country B. Those will be the primary attacks, right? So for most people, they're like, I don't care. I don't really care what happens. And secrets have a short shelf life. Your credit card number in a few years won't matter. It doesn't really matter, right? But if it's the Coca-Cola secret recipe, yeah, it has a long shelf life. Or if it's the location of a military base or whatever. And this is complicated by the fact that quantum attacks will take a while, right? So one thing I'd like to talk about as we go through this episode is this idea of the 5-day rule, what I'm starting to call it. And thanks to Gidney's paper from June 2025, we know that it'll take about 5 days of running multiple shots to crack RSA 2040. Yep, using 1,399 logical qubits. And those are supposed to be superconductive qubits and all that, but we'll just call it 1,400 qubits of any type for now, as long as they're logical, we'll pretend. So that's the 5-day concept, right? So that makes a lot of really scary things feasible and a lot of scary things not so feasible. So information has a super short, time window. Any kind of like token, anything that expires, yeah, quantum computer's never going to, who cares? Harvest it and decrypt it. It won't mean anything,
Mm.
It
And that's
also,
certainly true for things like payment transactions, like
yeah,
everything short-lived, right?
it'll just be whatever would have raised a little ding on a pen test, like, there's an account number exposed in this post or whatever. And then you were able to reverse that packet and get that account number. Fine. Some of that might be of use. It won't exactly get you in. You need other information, multi-factor, whatever. So that's like the general idea. It's Harvest-Now-Decrypt-Later, but why me, and how long will it take, and the effort? So it seems to be this false sense of, safety. But the truth is, when something's broken, you're supposed to fix it. You can make that same argument that everything should go in the clear at that point, because there's so much data flying around. Like, you can assume that people probably aren't going to bother looking at your stuff. Like, you can make that assumption, but it's definitely broken that way. So to be clear, to not be taken out of context, I'm not saying you should go over port 80, and I'm not saying don't worry about Harvest-Now. It's just this false insecurity that people are getting, and you could kind of get it, but it is a bad thing because you don't know which long shelf life secrets are being exposed, and you don't know when that 5-day rule will be invoked. But as we'll get to, I'm sure, there's a lot of things that 5-day rule allows for.
Right.
A ton of things.
And that's also why it's so important for organizations and governments, frankly, as they start out on their journey to determine, which are the crown jewels, so to speak, like which is the data with the long shelf life. What is the biggest threat really within my systems?
And that's what we do first. Yeah, literally. It's what are your crown jewels? And then a technical inventory, of course, to figure out what cryptography you're using. And then just right there, boom, that's such a major indexing that happens between what has to be fixed quickly and which vulnerable cipher is affected. And you get quite a landscape view. And then you bring in third parties and all those other issues that you have to handle.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that you raised there, right? You bring in third parties, meaning that you're going to have to activate the vendor supply chain for many of the things that you will find, and you will also likely not be able to solve this puzzle with just one partner. It is going to take a real team effort with your internal resources as well as external resources to address structuring and breaking down the problem for your organization, whilst also invoking the right countermeasures for what part of my system is most at risk. Right?
Third parties are not. I don't want people to think that third parties are a bad thing, right? In many cases, third parties are your savior. There's never been a better argument for moving to the cloud than now. I mean, that becomes their headache, right? We know, for example, that Microsoft is going to have all its core services PQC by 2029, and then other things after that. So these things, and that they'll lift some of the headache from you. So that's a great thing. Or Palo Alto, great example. If you're using them, that PanOS 12.1 is PQC ready. So ta-da, that's done. Checkbox. All those things, and the application layer firewalls that happen at the perimeter with them. So that's a great thing too, but we do have to address it. And it does become a bit of a problem if some of those third parties are vague. And that's the number one red flag, Like, when are you going to migrate? Oh, we're looking into PQC. Fail. No way.
Yeah.
That's not good enough.
Yeah.
No, we need to know versions. Yeah. We need to know what you're implementing.
Yeah.
It's all that.
I think that's the onus is on the purchasing entities, right? The purchasing managers. How do you structure your RFP to ask the right questions of your vendor supply chain? Like you said, is it just like one checkbox is like, oh, PQC, yes, we have that somewhere. Some of our products somewhere supports it. No, that's not going to be enough.
Yeah, no, it's not enough. And you mentioned earlier with Harvest-Now-Decrypt-Later, there's the Harvest-Now-Forge-Later angle. And that's where things get super juicy and potentially dangerous for everybody on day one, when Q day arrives. So all this work you could be doing in a company to start migrating, that's great and important. But wow, it can really crumble when it comes to a Harvest-Now, Forge attack.
So how do you explain in layman's terms the difference between Harvest-Now-Decrypt-Later and Harvest-Now-Forge-Later?
Sure. So the idea is you can think of it as a code signing attack, basically. You have some kind of mechanism in place for some kind of software, hardware combo, whatever it is. And to ensure that it's getting updates, this is the simplest example, to ensure it's getting updates from a valid source, it looks for a valid signature and says, oh, that really is Microsoft sending this patch to my laptop, And there have been code signing attacks that have nothing to do with quantum, right? There have been some famous ones. There's where things get into the supply chain where you inject malicious code like SolarWinds. There was the ASUS Shadow Hammer, where code was pushed out on ASUS Live Update. There have been things like this in the past, but they were there was no quantum computer involved in those attacks. But yeah, what we're worrying about is where whatever that mechanism is, it has some kind of like public key component or something that a quantum computer can reverse the private key. And then all of a sudden, you, dear quantum computer user, are Microsoft. You are, Apple. You are whatever major company. So getting back to the Harvest-Now-Decrypt-Later thing, if you wanted to attack a government agency, and you got a bunch of their packets, you would sit there spending 5 days with your quantum computer and you would reverse one message. And that one message would be, Fred's going to be at the drop at 3:00. And you're like, I don't know what drop that was. I don't know anything. And then it's a new stream and you got to do it all over again. So it might not be a great message. But if you know that this agency all uses insert brand of laptop or whatever here, then all of a sudden that tiny little goofy, audio driver or little applet or whatever could be the attacker. They can get that key, they can push out that update. It seems innocuous enough, simple enough. And then all of a sudden, you're not reading one agent's email. You're reading every agency, every email ever sent instantly. And that's where the 5-day rule breaks down completely. Because all of a sudden, information can be 1 second old. The minute it goes out as a packet, you've got it. You can act on it really fast. You can act on it if it's involved in some kind of other mechanism, if it's involved in some kind of like quick mechanism like blockchain or something. You might be able to get information that quickly and you can use that information. It just, I guess it depends. There's so many ways we could take this hypothetical attack scenario. But that worries me way more than most Harvest-Now-Decrypt-Later. It's this ability to destroy everything at once.
Yeah, because it's a much more fundamental thing. And in the beginning you said, if the threat actor is a nation state, they're going to be very strategic about how to use this capability.
Yes.
Right?
They will pick the maximum damage that they can do for whatever their goal is, right? Like, what's your goal? Is your goal chaos? If your goal is chaos, go after some version of the blockchain, right? I don't think China has always had the best love affair with Bitcoin, for example. There have been blocking of access, and that's affected the price at times and things like that. So if I were China and I really hated Bitcoin, what would I do? Well, I would use a quantum computer to steal any vulnerable wallet's money. And about a fourth of them are vulnerable. And for listeners who don't know, what happens there is that they've reused addresses that are exposed, and you can, in theory, take that and reverse the private key. And once you have the private key, you move those coins to your wallet. And believe me, people watch transactions. It's practically a hobby. It's like, I never understood the whole idea of people streaming gaming. Like you're playing a game and people are watching it, Twitch or whatever. I never got that really. And then during the pandemic, people used it for music or whatever. But I never understood that fascination. But people do that practically with the blockchain. They're like, look, someone moved $1 million. Who is that guy? What's he doing? And if you see Satoshi Nakamoto, a single Bitcoin of Satoshi's move, oh my God. In theory, it doesn't mean all of Bitcoin is vulnerable, but then it raises all sorts of gut feeling things in users, right? Like if you can steal several million Bitcoin, I put meaning a generic user, let's say, I put in hard money to get that. That's a real 50 grand I put in of my life savings to get these coins. And you mean some moron gets to just like take a few million like that, and I have to be okay with this? So those things can also cause like a mass chaos situation where the price can plummet or maybe go to zero because people won't understand if they're really vulnerable or not. And so there's that kind of attack you could do to cause chaos. To stay on the blockchain topic for one more second, there's something called BLS signatures. So if you have a proof of stake network, that's where, to save on electricity and not, boil the oceans just to do transaction or mining, you basically say, hey, I have 5,000 ETH, for example. So, you can trust me. I'm allowed to vote on this, right? That's just super simplifying it. So we don't stay on this topic for an hour. Well, a BLS signature is what lets you say that. what lets you say, I have 5,000 ETH, I'm Konstantinos, I'm this miner, and I wear a hard hat with a light. That's what it lets you say. Well,
You got a little hammer too.
yeah. So, whatever way you want to visualize what's not happening, actually. But a BLS signature, if cracked with a quantum computer, now all of a sudden you can attack that proof of stake mechanism. You can be someone you're not supposed to be, impersonate. You can cause chaos like that, and thereby, probably destroying Ethereum. So there are ways to destroy these blockchains that aren't post-quantum safe, and that's a terrible thing. And of course, like I like to say, you don't even have to actually succeed. Someone with enough clout, someone with enough recognition in the world could just say, I think there's a quantum computer powerful enough to attack Bitcoin, and that might do the damage. Like when Elon Musk said he didn't want Bitcoin for Tesla because it was bad for the environment, it dropped 30% or something like that overnight, the value, for a while. So we don't know. Like there's back to that China thing. There's ways you can attack for chaos like that, or to crumble trillions of dollars in the economy. There's ways you can attack to take over, a government agency. There's ways to just spy on everyone, push out apps on everyone's phone that are not the app you think they are anymore, whatever. So that it's what do you want to do with it? You only get a few chances, though. I feel like when you execute one of these things, you kind of get a few chances, and people figure it out, and that's why you do have to strike, with actual.
Well, you'd think those would be orchestrated, 1-2 punches kind of a thing. It's like, oh yeah, we're gonna destabilize the whole blockchain Bitcoin, but at the same time, hey, let's tinker with the water supply of 3 major cities or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I think
you gotta get in and out, and then see what happens, and if it accomplishes your goals. But the attackers are going to have to be big entities, right? I mean, like when I gave that DEF CON talk post-quantum panic, in it I pointed out there's 3 basic types of attackers. There's going to be nation state, because they could literally make their own machine or buy it or whatever. They're going to have one. Then, or really wealthy crime rings, like the kinds that would actually pull off APT attacks and things like that were sometimes also funded by nation state. So it gets a little nebulous.
I was going to say, that line is blurry.
Like a weird relationship they have. But those kinds of attackers can sometimes buy a machine, you'd imagine. I mean, we're projecting out in the future. But the lowly, back to, the lowly, like hoodie wearing hacker of stereotypical lore.
The script kiddie of the 1980s, 90s. Yeah.
They're going to have to access a machine on the cloud. And I've got to believe that Bracket, Amazon's cloud and at Microsoft Azure Quantum, I got to believe their terms of service are going to change, because right now it's very hands off. It's very, we don't look at what you're doing. And then the hardware manufacturer doesn't look at what you're doing. And then that way, no one knows what you're running. Even though it's trivial to detect Shore's algorithm is running, you can do it on multiple layers with Stack, multiple. And they just don't. But I think those terms are going to change. And I think that when the machines are relevant, it's going to say, whoa, you're not allowed to crack above whatever, as proof of concept. You can't go that high. Just like right now, even though they have these hands-off terms, I don't believe for a second you're going to be allowed to go online ever and start a botnet, right? It'll take minutes probably before Microsoft figures out what you're doing or whatever on the network.
Yeah. Well, so very quickly we're going to have that dialogue about guardrails and policies that need to be in place, and that's going to get some lawyers involved, and it's going to get an interesting conversation in no time, right? So, but okay, so shifting away focus from Harvest-Now-Decrypt-Later of, boring emails a little bit to say, well, the real threat is in the big code signing attacks of our supply chains, as well as the Harvest-Now-Forge-Later type mm-hmm. attacks that we spoke about, mm-hmm. in the context of blockchain, of course. Now, the DEF CON talk that you mentioned on, I think it was this year's DEF CON, post-quantum panic. Of course, you got a lot of attention in, I think you got over 100,000 views on YouTube.
Within a month, it was crazy. I couldn't believe
just a few weeks. So I think that's great, because that means we're sending the right message to a lot of folks out there to go like, hey, start thinking about this, right? Get your propellers spinning. Mm-hmm. And I think the one of the takeaways for me was, your viewpoint of timelines, because of course that's been discussed for the longest time, right? I mean, if you said it yourself, you've been in sort of the quantum universe for a very long time, right? So for you, this is like a natural progression of, okay, now we're out in the open and everyone's talking about, right? And there's like, those timelines floating about of like 5 to 10 years. And it's always been 10 years, but now, it's actually 5 to 10 years because, NIST kind of started that global push of setting those timelines. And many guidelines that we're seeing being released even just over the past few months, tighten down on those timelines even. Like, I happen to be in Australia at the moment, and they just released their new timelines, and they say, well, gotta get started by 2026, be, in the middle of migrating by 2028, and be done by 2030 for critical national infrastructure, right?
Good move.
So what's yeah, no, exactly. And then so what's your take on those timelines? Like how do you see that whole thing unfolding to get us to a cryptographically relevant quantum computer?
Yeah, it's funny because there's multiple layers to this. One is we were always too late. Like if you look at Moscow's theorem, you take the shelf life of a secret, you add the number of years that it takes you to migrate, and you're always going to end up with a number that blows out of the water any expectation of when a quantum computer is going to be here that's powerful enough to crack encryption. So you're kind of always like dead in the water anyway. But when it gets down to what the actual timelines are, I've seen some things lately that are exciting and concerning. Some things that make cracking cryptography seem like the first ChatGPT moment for quantum computing, which is probably not what anyone wanted it to be. We wanted it to be like, yay, you can make money immediately. You can, optimize your trucks or whatever. We wanted that to be the thing that changed, or we found a carbon capture molecule to improve, global warming or whatever. But there's a chance that the first thing that breaks all the headlines is, we just cracked RSA 2048. I mean, it's very likely. And of course, Gidney's paper, which I mentioned earlier, where I'm saying this 5-day rule thing, that paper was an eye-opener because when Shor first came up with his algorithm, he thought 1 billion physical qubits. Then Gidney Nakara, just like 6 years ago, said 20 million physical qubits. And now just Gidney was like, actually, I think it's going to be like 896,000 qubits. And then only, let's say, 1399 logical, and it's going to take 5 days. And all of a sudden, it's like, okay, this is super real. And at the same time, IonQ announced their new timeline based on acquisitions. And as Nicola Damasi said just a few weeks ago, the CEO, he said people were talking about, I'm paraphrasing, that people were talking about cracking encryption in 10 years. At IonQ, we want to do it in 10 quarters. Yikes, 10 quarters? You can't even approve like a new type of laptop to roll out to your fleet in 10 quarters. It's insane. And all of a sudden it's knocking on the door. And a lot of other companies, their timelines are, not too far off. Like Photonic has an aggressive one now. They're thinking 40,000 logical qubits by 2030. That's way more than they need to crack encryption. So dial it back a couple of years. We're all now starting to see 2028, 2029, that border there as the end times. And wow, no one's done anything with the exception of like a few bizarre, outliers. Everyone else is post-quantum deadly, not ready. It's bad times. So a whole lot of packets are being harvested, I'm sure furiously right now, in hopes that they could be used, and a whole lot of threat modeling is being done, as we discussed, about nation states deciding which application to go after. So yeah, the timeline is shrinking. We only have a few years, and I don't see the movement I need to be seeing. Yeah, there's some browsers that were ahead of the game. Chrome, for example, they had 1.3 early and everything. So you could, in theory, I mean, just because you have it doesn't mean you're post-quantum, right? You have to have something handshaking with you, but in theory that would work. There was, iMessage, Signal, there are things that have it, but it doesn't really mean that the world is safe by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, we're not at that crucial pivot point yet when you're like, okay.
And also back to that Gidney paper, it's not just that he came up with this more efficient way to do it. It's that it is possible to come up with a more efficient way of doing it. And how do we know that that's done? How do we know that Gidney's the final word? Besides the fact that he wrote 2 of the most famous papers on the subject, like how do we know? Maybe even he will improve it. Look at Alpha Evolve. It was able to knock out an operation from matrix multiplication, something we thought since the 60s was a done deal. And now all of a sudden you can do it more efficiently. How do we know if some combination of AI and a smart researcher won't come up with a way to make it 800 logical qubits in 3 days? I don't know. It's not necessarily the be-all, end-all final number. It could get even better. So these things should be keeping people up at night because it's a perfect storm. And, this is the first time we knew a 0 day is coming. It's like,
it's kind of like
we've never had this ever.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had Y2K, but that's not a 0 day. Y2K is a flaw that we have to fix, right? Heartbleed was a 0 day that kept everyone updating servers. So it's like if Y2K and Heartbleed had a baby, and we know it's coming. We have this wonderful luxury of knowing it's coming. And I get crickets from some folks like, yeah, we're going to look into it next year or the year after that. And it's dangerous.
Yeah, so the crickets, I think the crickets is interesting, right? So, I mean, you obviously work a lot with, some of the largest organizations that, kind of come to you in Protivity and say like, what do we do? Where do we start? So sort of, taking all that talk about doom the last 20 minutes, how do you sort of turn around and go like, don't you worry, we have the tools, we have the arrows in our quiver that we need. Here's how we fix this.
Yeah.
What's your approach? Like, how do you get to that starting line and go like, all right, take a breath.
It's great being at Protivity because Protivity used to be one of the big 5 technically. So people are familiar with the term big 4, but it used to be the big 5. Arthur Anderson was the 5th. And when they dissolved, the folks involved with like technology and stuff, they built out this whole new company. So we're like the big 4.5, I like to think of us as. And and we've been around for a couple of decades, and that's a lot of security experience, So I have a huge army of really, really smart security people that I could deploy to do what I call the security bait and tackle of it, So once I help a customer get started with this idea of all these things that need to be done, we have the smarts on how to actually take care of such things, So like quantum is just the threat vector. There's nothing quantum about post-quantum cryptography. So anyone listening, you want to make a name for yourself in security and do great things, get involved in helping companies migrate to post-quantum cryptography, It's very much a security knowledge kind of thing. So we have the experience with frameworks and things like that and audits to be able to help customers through these types of journeys, whether quantum was the thing or not, PCI, et cetera, examples. So we just do some of the things we talked about earlier first. We do the crown jewels, the inventory, the understanding how cryptography works in your organization, your third party. We look at how you do code development. Are you being very monolithic, or do you have modules so you don't have to destroy your code base every time something happens? You can just plug in new things. So we kind of figure all that out and help you come up with your game plan, and then we can help you execute it. And customers want different levels of help with that. Some customers have a huge
depending
team.
on the resources they have.
They have a huge team. They want them implementing policies and doing things week after week. So they just want to, quote, learn how to fish. And that's fine, and we do that. But if they want more help, we do that too. So that's why it's great to have this kind of like tremendous army to help like any size customer as they need it. Yeah.
So basically, if I can paraphrase that, your viewpoint is somewhat, even though quantum computers are the trigger event, this is really an exercise in cyber resiliency.
Oh, yes.
With all the things that we need to take care of anyway. So, defense in depth and, layered security and all those fine things and, policies and procedures, not just technology, also people. And yes, there's a, bunch of new names for algorithms that you need to learn. And now we're using, MLChem instead of RSA or whatnot. But that's just really a minor detail. Like you don't have to have a PhD in cryptography to be able to migrate right your
What makes it
organization
so
over to.
weird though is that Shor's algorithm affects so many things. Whereas in the past, it would always be this one breaking point. It would be like, we got to migrate from SSL to TLS because of these collisions or whatever. But no, now we've got to migrate all that stuff and this and this and this and this and blockchain and then like everything you've ever heard of because of this one weakness, So that makes it a little different, but again, it still is security. You're not inventing some new thing. You have to very carefully address each of those and do your own ideas of come up with your own ideas of what has to be done first.
It's
so we
it's
help
like
with all
your
of that.
it's like your honey-do list of cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Right? It just keeps getting longer and longer.
and it's not always going to be its own thing, right? I'm starting to see PQC just become part of other things, like the 2.0 framework. There's a draft version that's gonna have like all PQC concerns in there. There's PCI 4.0 already says you have to track cryptographic threats and whatever. So, so that's basically code for, my view, that's code for PQC too. It's just going to start appearing in all these different things. So the things that people are doing, whatever frameworks or assessments you're doing, they're going to have quantum checkboxes. And that's why I like to stress that people shouldn't freak out about that. Like I'll talk to people in audit or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, what are we going to do about this quantum thing?" It's like, well, what did you do about all these other things? You're going to make your Excel spreadsheet and add a thing that says PQC yes, no. I mean, I'm simplifying, but
no,
you're
but
going to do the same thing.
You get your point.
It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
So in a way, I'm sort of I'm comfortable to let my baby go out into the world like that. Like I don't feel the need to shepherd every PQC project from now to the end of time, because pretty soon it's just going to be C. Like no one's going to be thinking about the PQ part. It's just going to be like, why aren't you using MLChem? Duh, that's what everyone uses. Like that's what it's going to be. It's not going to be, no, post-quantum. It's going to just be the thing everyone does. My favorite example is like Wi-Fi, the early days of Wi-Fi. There's a reason there was a wireless village at DEF CON right away, because it was such a polarizing thing. It was like, you can't use 802.11b, you have to use 802.11g, people were coming up with ways to hack Wi-Fi, and et cetera. It just became this whole mania. For good reason, obviously. I didn't want anyone's information going in the clear. But now what do? You go to Best Buy or wherever, you buy a router, and it has everything. And you don't even slightly think about what standards of security are in it. It's just the thing, Yeah, and that's exactly what PQC is going to be. If I envy any company that starts 2-3 years from now, because turnkey, anything they do will just be PQC, right? It'll be like, you got your cloud workload PQC, you bought your servers, they're PQC, you bought your routers, that's PQC, Cisco stuff, yeah, PQC. You have Palo Alto, yeah. It's still just going to be the way it is, and you're just going to step in and you'll be like, this is cozy, So it's always going to be one day.
Yeah, it's almost I've heard people say that the term post-quantum cryptography is somewhat not the luckiest choice, right? If we could use, like you said, if we could use the PQ and just focus on what is important for the next few decades, I think it would be a very different
and
conversations that we'd be having. Yeah.
Right? We hope it holds, so we don't have PQC,
right? Yeah. I think that's an entire topic for another podcast, right? To dive into everything we have is lattice-based now. Is it what if lattice breaks? It's like, well,
yeah. And of course, NIST has sort of thought about that, to give them credit, right? Like they're not done next year, depending on when this posts. But yeah, 2026, we expect to see drafts for HQC, which is code-based. And that should probably go final by 2027. So in 2027, you'll have this other finalist for key encapsulation.
You have additional tools in your cryptographic toolbox, which actually is a good thing, right? Because in the past we had to make do with just a screwdriver and a hammer, and now we have like all these different other tools for specific use cases. So that's great.
Maybe it'll be a hybrid one day. Think about it. It'll be a lattice wrapped by a code base. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Something like you said it first.
Yeah, there you go. I will call that Konstantinos encryption. But
Perfect. So, a little bit of a final thought, advice for companies, organizations that, are sort of still on the fence about this. Like, where do you point them to? Where should they get started? How can they, read up on all the good work you're doing in some of the groups that you're involved with?
yeah, a few things to say there. The biggest one is just remember this is literally everybody's problem on the planet. Everyone's problem. Whether back to my first little lighthearted point about like maybe your message won't be decrypted, it's still your problem because of all those other attacks we talked about, or if you have cryptocurrency or whatever. But it is everybody's problem. When something's broken, it really is broken. So you don't want to be famous for being the first company that provably was pwned because of no PQC.
That's the that's the headline you don't want.
Yeah. Insert bank name here. First to be hacked with a quantum computer. Probably not what you want. So the time is 2 years ago to get started, but we'll accept now. And it is, as you heard me say, it is going to be a lot of the stuff you're already doing anyway. You're not using SSL. You're using TLS 1.3, hopefully. You've done this kind of thing before. It's just this is a slightly larger scale. So the time is obviously now to get started and do some of those steps we said. There are companies that can help you if you can't get started. Like I can help you. Like there are folks who can help you with that. And follow through. And really stick to your guns on this one. I don't think you have very long. I think we could prove you don't have very long. So I would say to get going and of course explore the benefits of quantum too. It's not just about the fear. There's something that these machines are going to do for your industry that might revolutionize and give you a lead. So don't sleep on that. Look into quantum use cases too. Don't just view this as a fear thing. So that's important. And I do a lot of different things in this space. I do the Post Quantum World podcast. I talk about it. I do talks at places. And I might be working on some other interesting things, but I'm not at liberty to say them just yet. But some other ways that this stuff will be publicly revealed. And I'm always interested to hear from folks who are struggling with this. You can always reach out to me.
So LinkedIn is a good way of getting in touch with you.
LinkedIn or on X. I'm Constant Hacker. That's, as I say on the podcast, Constant with a K, Hacker. You can reach me there too. I'm always up for a good nerdy chat. Take it seriously.
Well, thanks for sharing your insights, Konstantinos. It's been a great conversation. So thanks for joining.
I really enjoyed this. Thanks so much for having me on.
Great, absolutely. And to our listeners, thanks for sticking with us through yet another episode of Shielded. Until next time. The quantum era is already here. With the right tools, the right knowledge, and the right mindset, together we can face it head on. To find out more about PQ Shield and how our cutting-edge solutions can help you secure your data against the quantum threat, visit pqshield.com. Make sure to search for Shielded, the last line of cyber defense, in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. Don't forget to click subscribe so you never miss an episode. On behalf of the team here at PQ Shield, thanks for listening.